Good. When you're done with the contour lines, you're going to erase your grid lines first, and erase all of them. I don't have any grid lines on the whole paper. I know you can only see a chunk of it right now, but that's all I have. And the next thing you're going to do, remember you're saving the hair for very last. So you are going to look weird. Just deal with it. All right? You're not going to have eyebrows. You're not going to have hair for a while. You'll look bald. You'll be fine. All right? And then you're going to start out just like I have, where you're going to pick one feature to focus on at a time. Do not start with the forehead, the cheek, the neck, anything that's open and kind of just empty. Don't start with areas like that. It's a lot more difficult. Okay, so it's way easier to do just like we did the practice thing where you did one feature at a time, although they were scattered and not in any order at all. Here you're going to do the same thing. And you decide which one you want to start with, your eye, your nose, your mouth, whatever you want to do. So I started with an eye. I tend to just find something that I think is darker. I don't know why, I just find that easier for me. That might help you. It's totally up to you. The other thing is you're going to be getting, when you get to that point, you're going to be getting a blending stick, and it looks like this. And it's really just a fancy rolled up piece of paper. It's nothing super special. It's not really strong. And so there are some tricks to using it, and I'll show you that in a second. But it helps you get really smooth values, and it also really helps you go from very, very subtle light values to the white of the paper without having a line there. Remember, one of the things you will definitely get graded on is your ability to show value without any outlines, just like the last drawing. But it's a lot different now with pencil than it is with chalk. It's just a different technique. And it's a little trickier. Some things to keep in mind is your lightest values, like the white of her eye here, can be the white of the paper. So your lightest shade in your drawing can be the paper showing through. That's okay. So you can use this paper as your lightest white. All right. I had a couple of questions earlier. Just as a reminder, you do want to be using your HB pencil to get things started. If you don't have one or you lost it, there are extras up here. And if there aren't, I can get you one. Or if it says 2H, that's okay also. But sketch real lightly to get started. But when you are ready for value, you erase the grid and you're going to start with one feature at a time. Now, when I say one feature at a time, I mean, like if I choose to start with the eye, you're going to do more than just these values on the inside on the white of the eye. That means do everything around it. Like the eye socket is what we're talking about. And if I was to draw the nose next, which maybe I'll do that, maybe I'll start with that one next to show you guys. If I were to start the nose next and then do the mouth, most of the cheek ends up being done just sort of by default because you're doing all the shadows around the eye and all the shadows around the nose and so on. And then it just kind of, the cheek just kind of comes together by accident. It's a lot easier than starting with the cheek because there's not a lot of changes. Like if you look at this cheek, there's not a big significant change from here to here. It gets a little bit lighter, but not very much, and that's hard to start with. So it's a lot easier to find things that have more contrast and value, more change from dark to light, and that's just an easier place to start. So that's why I started with that eye. I'm going to start with my HB pencil because you can always make it lighter, or I'm sorry, darker. It's a lot harder to go back and have to erase later and have to try to make it lighter. So now, if I'm moving on and I'm going to start this next section, if I'm going to do the nose, even, this should be a review for you guys also. We did this with your, with the practice exercises as well. So it's the same idea where you want to make sure you're picking just one tiny part at a time to focus on. So I'm not going to think about drawing the whole nose. I'm just going to think about drawing this part right here, just like this top part of the nostril on the left. Break it into smaller sections. It's a lot easier to handle. All right, and also remember you need to keep your pencil marks pretty close together. You shouldn't have, if you're shading and you go over the whole nose like this and you have all those lines in between, you don't want individual pencil marks showing. You don't want spaces between your pencil marks. You want to make sure you keep it nice and smooth. The blending stick helps you fill in those gaps somewhat, but it can't help you with that much of a difference. That's too big of a space to cover. All right? So now, if I'm starting with just where I have this shadow, and I have this shadow drawn in like we talked about yesterday, you'd want to draw in the shapes around the shadows so you know where they're going to go. So I know that this shadow that is right here, and at this point I don't need the grid on top of it. So most of you don't need to take it all the way off in case you need it later, but you can just kind of flip it up and have it out of the way. It's easier to see the picture that way. But I know what shape that shadow is going to be in already because I already have it drawn in. And I'm going to keep my pencil marks nice and close together I'm going to start out pretty light. It's not too dark of a shadow, so I don't want to go too dark too fast. And remember, I'm keeping my pencil marks really close together. Whatever you do first, like Caitlin walked by and was like, that baby looks like she has a black eye. It's true. It absolutely is true. And so keep that in mind. When you start, it's gonna, like, whatever you start with, whatever you do first is going to stand out the most because it's the only thing shaded. So it's going to be significantly darker than the rest of your page, and it's going to stand out and look weird. And that's okay. Until, you know, once all of this stuff is done, it'll balance it out. It won't look like a black eye anymore. No abused children in my drawings. That would be a little creepy, yeah. And this is a great example of how to use the blending stick. So that's just the shape of the shadow. And the shadow that comes over the nose here is still really, really light, so I don't want it to get super dark. I'm just going to use the blending stick right now. And what it does is it moves that graphite around and fills in those spaces that your pencil can't reach. I'm not pressing hard with it, and I'm not going to use the tip like this. You want to use the side just like you would with the pencil. It's just a piece of paper. If you use this and you use the tip only, it's just going to eventually turn into a little nub, and you'll need a new one, which is fine. You can get new ones from me. They're cheap. But just try to get as much out of one as you can, and use the side. And treat it like a drawing utensil. If I were to go like this right now, I would leave a line through the paper. It picks up the charcoal, or I'm sorry, the pencil. So you want to be careful with that. But what I love about it is that right here, where that shadow on her face, if we look at that closer, that shadow right here, there's no significant like hard line or edge to where that shadow stops. So I need to slowly and smoothly change my value from this value out to that lighter value. And so to do that, the blending stick is just perfect because I can use the lighter, or the side of it, to kind of just make it fuzzy, blur it out. And again, make sure you're not pressing too hard. But it's great. It kind of does all the work for you if you let it. And I can also cheat over here where this is a little bit lighter, but not significantly lighter. I might not want to use pencil right away. I might just use some of this excess graphite from right here to do the shading on top of the nostril here. Okay, and this is a really small section, and think about how long this is taking me to do, and all I'm doing is this tiny part of the nostril. This is why this project takes so long. So take time with it. It's your face. You want it to turn out well. Most kids want this one to turn out better than any other project, so take your time with it. You have time to finish it. Don't rush. I also have these brushes. I'll zoom out here for you. Oops, we're in. I have these brushes, and I'll let you use them so that you can get rid of eraser marks easily without smearing your work. But I'm only going to let you use them if they stay like this. If I start finding hairs everywhere because you're ripping them apart and not using them correctly and abusing them, they're really expensive. So if that's the case, I'm going to lock the drawer and you won't be able to use them anymore. But if you're nice to them, you'll have to share. There's not one for everybody. But it's nice to clear off any extra eraser particles and whatnot. Okay? So really important tips is to make sure you start out at, lighter. You can always make it darker. And to use the blending stick like a drawing tool. Use the side of it. Make sure your grid marks are erased before you start, and make sure you just find one tiny section to choose to work on at a time. When you're happy with that, move on to the next section.